Welcome to Salam Media. Today we have a special program, a special host, a special guest for a special day. It is 78th anniversary of Nakba here on Salam Media. And for that, we have a special program that is hosted by myself, Mametlwe Sebei. I'm the president of the General Industries Workers Union, one of the unions that is affiliated to South African Federation of Trade Unions, whose general secretary is here, and I'll come back to that. But part of what we have been doing is organizing workers in Clover and other companies which, of course, have Zionist interest, and we have had campaigns in solidarity with the Palestinian people. One of the most well-known is a strike at Clover, I think about 2 or 3 years ago. And one of the guests that I have here in studio is SAFTU General Secretary, Comrade Zwelinzima Vavi, who also played an important role in the leadership of the strike. It's not just the two of us. I'm also having Revonia Pillay, who is a social media and comms lead at Global Sumut Flotilla, South Africa. I think we are going to be joined. Oh, I see. We are also joined online by Comrade Professor Patrick Bond, who is also playing very important role in the workers' movement. Is one of the researchers that are responsible for most of the things that we see coming out of GIWUSA, SAFTU, and of course many other unions. But it's also one of the coordinators, but also key researchers in the South African energy embargo for Palestine. And I think we'll be talking more about that. Welcome to you all, Comrade Vavi, Comrade Vonia, Comrade Patrick.
Thank you very much for having me. To introduce myself.
Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone.
Comrade Patrick.
Assalamu alaikum. Great to be with the comrades in the house and all of the viewers of Salam Media. What a great station. Thank you for having me.
I think just to kickstart this conversation, and perhaps Comrade Vav, you can come here. Today marks the 78th anniversary of Nakba. And I think it's important in particular for people to understand that at the very foundation of Israel itself, there was horrific massacres, displacement of the Palestinian people that created the state that today is Israel. And the Palestinians called that Nakba. And I think, it continues to mark the horrific history of the state, the brutalization of the Palestinians. Can you be able to take us through that? What is Nakba, and what does it mean in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian relations, but also today?
Well, Nakba means a disaster, a catastrophe. This is what the Palestinians said about their own experiences this day in 1948, now 78 years ago. What they meant, they were meaning the fact that 750,000 of them were forced to leave their own land. They were expelled from their own homes. Just imagine, 750,000 people. 400 Palestinian villages and towns, villages and towns, 400 of them were destroyed, depopulated, or taken over by this invading army. A large number of Palestinians were killed, massacred in the military attacks. And Palestinians became refugees in Gaza, in West Bank, in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and elsewhere. According to the United Nations, the biggest population in the whole world of refugees are people who are coming from Palestine.
Palestinians.
And the families lost their homes. They lost their farms, their businesses, their property. And many, in fact, today is that Israel have sort of imposed a law that says once we successfully force you out, you have lost your citizenship of your own country, and you will never be allowed to be called a Palestinian again. That's what Nakba is.
I mean, many people, particularly in South Africa, tend to confuse this Israel with the biblical Israel. That these Palestinians are actually, Arab, invaders or migrants from elsewhere in the Arab world. What we have to say to that, particularly in the context of the displacement, who are the Palestinians, and the displacement, in what way, marks basically a rupture, between the land that historically and has always been Palestine, and the creation of the state of Israel today?
Well, that's a very important question, because a lot of South Africans, estimated to be above 80%, are Christians. And so in the Bible, there is something called Jerusalem, the home of the Christian faith.
Yeah.
And
spiritual home.
The spiritual home of all Christians. And so that's why over many years, there would have been trips of Christians all over to Jerusalem every Sunday in the sermon.
For the same reason that Muslims go to Mecca.
Exactly. The Christians go to Jerusalem, and they sing every Sunday, Jerusalem, our home. And they see every day they pray for Israel. And in their I'm happy that we are making progress, because a lot of them really confuse that spiritual Israel and Jerusalem in the Bible to be the same as the one that was created through Nakba in 1948. That's the first point that I felt that I must make. The second point is that a lot of people from the Bible believe that the Israeli as a nation is the chosen one by God. And every day they pray against its enemies, and that it will triumph exactly in the same way that it triumphed in the Bible. They pray that Israel must win.
So all these massacres, genocides are actually sanctioned
by the Bible.
And it's a victory, for God, basically.
Absolutely. And that's why it makes it so difficult to mobilize for solidarity with Palestine in countries such as ours that are so dominated by the Christian faith. They honestly believe that this is the same thing. What today helps us to do is to educate a broader public that will say, no, the Israeli we are talking about today is the one that didn't exist before 1948. It is the Israeli that constituted a group of settlers in search of land, and they would have identified the land of Palestine as a land that they can now create as their own to establish their own headquarters. And so since 1948, there has been war after war, massacre after massacre, more displacement of people, more bombing of the homes, more displacement of children from their schools and universities, more kicking out of people. There have been a deliberate attempt to wipe out the entire nation from the face of earth, meaning from the face of Palestine through this aggression, of course, ably assisted by the USA imperialism. And so that's what we are commemorating today. It's a very sad day in the history of humankind. And
But just on that, you see, I'm glad you're bringing the issue of Jerusalem, because that's a thing, right? That one, the DNA test among the Palestinians shows that this is a DNA that actually goes all the way back to the Canaanites. So many of the Palestinians are the people that have been there before, the establishment even of the biblical Israel, that many of them actually would have been descendants even of the Israelites themselves, because we know that the last time there was a major change of population was actually 300 or so before the birth of Christ, I think, when Alexander conquered that area. But ever since, there hasn't been. It's just people changing faith. Like, and this is a point I wanted to bring to you, that for the same reason that if you're a Christian, you'll say Jerusalem is your spiritual home. We have Christians, in Limpopo, mainly they are from the CC, right? They call themselves Homu, meaning their totem is a cow. But many of them actually have other totems. The reason they are called Homu is because this is a totem of their main spiritual leader, Lechanya. That doesn't mean they belong to that. And from my reading of history is that that's a case with Israel, that the Jews that are there, the Palestinians that are there, are the real indigenous people, many of whom have been there for thousands and thousands of years. And of course, many of the Jews are just religious converts.
absolutely. If you read that history again, it will also tell you that that particular settlement was somehow in response to another massacre that the Jews community and the world calls today what they call it when they commemorate the massacre by Hitler. There's a name for it.
Holocaust.
The Holocaust. We call it the Holocaust. Post the Holocaust, after millions of Jews have been killed, gas chambered, massacred, a particular group of them would have been moving around the world trying to find a home as survivors of that of the Holocaust. They went to the USA, they were not accepted as a nation.
They were turned away.
They were turned away. In fact, they were turned away. They went all over until they identified this piece of land, Palestine. And so that's it's not a history of some 1,000 years ago. This is what happened after the 1940, 41, 42 Second World War. So in 1948, then they would have invaded this piece of land of the Palestinians, as you are correctly saying, a land that has always been associated and occupied by the Palestinians. Now there is a propaganda to hide that from the ordinary citizen of the world, not to dig the fact that the Palestinians have for thousands and thousands of years.
Because they like to say this is the area that has had a war for thousands of years,
Exactly.
as if this is a continuation.
They're trying to make a
of the
connection. They are deliberately trying to make a connection between their wars today to wipe off the
With the
face of
biblical
earth
stories.
and the biblical stories.
Yeah.
But interestingly for South Africans, the fellows who love the Bible, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, is not a Christian himself. He practices a different faith
He's
called.
not even a practicing Jew.
He's not
from what I
even a.
can-
I mean, he is nothing of that kind. But it is so convenient
And the
for them.
founders of Israel were actually secular people that were atheists.
Yeah, but it makes a very good propaganda angle for them now.
They don't believe in God, but they do believe He gave them the land.
Exactly. It's very, very, it's very, very, there's no better way of putting it.
Yeah,
We are the children of God. We don't believe in that God.
yeah.
We don't believe in that there was ever a Christ that was born and died in some cave in Jerusalem. But we want to use this because it helps us convince billions, because it's not just millions, billions of the citizens of the world that we have a right to kick out from this space the people of Palestine. That's the first thing that they want us to believe.
Let me just bring you, Rivonia, into this. I mean, thinking about Nakba, I mean, I can imagine the level of betrayal, not only, I mean, of the Palestinians themselves, because many of them, I mean, hosted, I mean, the stories I've read of families that literally opened their houses and homes to, you know, the Jewish people that were facing persecution, that were facing, you know, Holocaust in Europe, only to be ultimately chased away from those very houses. But also, you know, Muslims who were in solidarity with the Jewish people, because I think they consider them to be people of the holy, you know, book, Quran, and I think very welcoming. In fact, Jewish culture thrived in Muslim lands. The level of betrayal, you know, people you hosted, and just barely months after the end of Holocaust, that the same people could be committing, or you know, people who survived such horrific massacre or, you know, genocide that was Holocaust, could be committing it to Palestinians just few months down the line.
Thanks for that. I think an important thing to remember, as Comrade Vavi mentioned, it's not just Muslim households that were hurt. There were Christian households and communities that were hurt as well. So it's communities that were indigenous to the lands that were hurt by this 15th of May massacre. And I think another thing to remember is that it began before 1948 as well. There's a history of colonization in that land. There's a history of delineating geography that we've experienced on this continent that occurred by colonizers that went across and claimed land and divided land. And so this history of putting people against each other is not necessarily between an oppressed and an oppressed. It's often imbued by the oppressors that are there, that make us feel the scarcity mindset of. I mean, we're seeing it now play out in South Africa as well. It's this false narrative of we need to claim this, otherwise we will not have.
And I'm glad you are bringing the issue of the Christian, because I mean that's the thing, right? Most of the Zionist, Jewish and Christian, they are portraying it as a war between Islam and, you know, and Judaism. Whereas in the movement, we've always said this is a national liberation struggle. Among the Palestinians, they're Muslims, majority, of course, but also they're Christians, some of the most ancient, you know, Christian population. I mean, this is the land of birth of Christianity, right? They were, I mean, Jewish people that are also indigenous to that area, that were part of Palestinians and lived with, and as Palestinians themselves for far too long before the arrival mainly of the European Zionists. So, I mean, how do we respond to that?
Yeah, it's a complex one, because I think that's also the delineations we must make. This is a Zionist entity's agenda. And it's very different from some people conflating that with the Jewish community. Many are full mind support of this Palestinian liberation struggle. I think it's removing it from this Jewish, Christian, Muslim narrative in order to understand that it's a government.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
This Eid al-Adha, your Qurbani can reach someone who truly needs it. Across South Africa and Malawi, families are not thinking about celebrations. They are simply hoping for a meal. With Ashraful Aid, your Qurbani is delivered directly to those in need, making your sacrifice meaningful. Fulfill your obligation. Feed a family. Give hope this Eid. Visit ashrafulaid.org and donate today. Ashraful Aid, with humanity, for humanity.
When the warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities. Conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities, your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Africa. Give the gift of clean water with Africa Muslims Agency. With every water well or borehole you donate, your drop becomes dignity and empowerment. Sponsor a water rand in
last aid. After the aid, we go in live. This is the last aid. After this aid, we go in live.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
Welcome back to this special dialogue on the 78th anniversary of Nakba. Again, just with me in studio is Rivonia Pele, who is a social media and comms lead at Global, Global Sumut Flotilla, who would actually be joining this conversation a little bit later, as I'm continuing with the General Secretary of South African Federation of Trade North. Just to again continue with your Comrade Vavi. I mean, during apartheid, or anti-apartheid struggle, the solidarity between the movement here in South Africa for liberation and of course the struggles of the Palestinian people, that solidarity was always taken for granted, partly because of also the collaboration between apartheid South Africa and apartheid Israel, but also that I think anything is much more clearer today, right? South Africans can see, just when you tell them, the one that are conscious, the similarities in terms of the experience of apartheid. Why is it that today we do not see mobilization of many people, particularly in the African communities, in the African working class, that the issue of Palestine is viewed more still as a Muslim issue instead of all freedom loving, but also of the black working class in particular?
There are several reasons in order to just debate with you. The first one is that there is a death of politics and ideology.
Okay, so when Mr. Vavi is done, we will go for another ad break and then continue with the show.
In the past. And this is one of the few areas where Chris Hardy would have been wrong. I remember I was speaking to him. He said to me, South Africa is the most politically conscious nation in the whole world, and that it will not be possible for any government in future to turn the revolution against itself, to begin to eat its own children, and to divert the whole mission away from what it was meant to be, a total liberation of a humankind from want, from poverty, from inequality, joblessness, homelessness, and all of that. He was wrong. There we are, 32 years again. South Africa's level of consciousness have plummeted to the point that 2/3 of its population, the voting population, are today refusing to participate in the elections because they have been disappointed by their primary liberation movement, the African National Congress. But the level of consciousness says we can trust no one else anymore after this disappointment. So there is a weakened levels of consciousness. And so there's no politics that we are debating. And if you are in the social media, you get this that gosh, the politics are gone. The level of consciousness amongst ordinary South Africans is gone. So that's the first thing. There's a reason for that. The second reason is that there was too much emphasis on the messianic figure in the form of Nelson Mandela post 1994. Look, Nelson Mandela was big thing among black people. 27 years in prison, people thought that he was a semi-god. And the people who came from exile were highly regarded. Every song was about O.R. Tambo in the streets of South Africa. And so, unfortunately, when Parliament got constituted by these heroes and heroines, there was a belief amongst many South Africans that we don't have to struggle anymore.
Everything will fall into
Everything will be done by our leaders, 400 of them. They're in Parliament, which was a fatal mistake, believing in the politics of Messiah and also of the ultimate hero that will deliver. All you have to do is to sit down. The third reason is that in the process of doing that, unions, civil society, including religious formations, weakened. And they no longer became the conscience of the nation, the heartbeat of the nation. And we are weaker, all of us combined, today than ever before.
It's incredible because, I mean, I see it and I always say it in stuff that it's not just in the political movements. People can't hold even to old faiths. You see it with the proliferation of charlatanism, charlatans who are promising miracles and riches.
The charlatans today are occupying the streets, whilst the movements that liberated South Africa are sitting back and watching in horror the charlatans, the lumpen elements of society, really misleading society. One of those charlatans says there are 100 million people here. Another charlatan will say there are 15 to 25 million migrants in South Africa. The country has been taken over by the migrants. The other charlatan says we can actually give him 1 million rands every year to every citizen of this country and get out of the hole we are finding ourselves in. So, and people in the social media are repeating these stories in belief. If you were to say today, as I'm sure we will all going to say, SAFTU have just issued a statement on Nakba, 78th commemoration. there will be hardly anyone retweeting and also talking about that. But if the charlatan says, we will give you R1 million every year for the rest of your lives, you don't have to work anymore. Hey, thousands and thousands of people. That's what is happening. So, from that background, the issue of Palestine, which was very, very high up in the heightened levels of consciousness and the battle against apartheid before, the another messianic figure, Yasser Arafat, and the pictures with Nelson Mandela have sort of faded in the memory of the dying generation. And the new ones are even now calling Nelson Mandela the biggest sellout of all time. And surely they will say the same thing about all of his comrades and would they attach no significance. Yasser Arafat, Fidel Castro, and Che Guevara, you name them, all of these heroes of the 18th and 19th century.
I mean, if I just came there,
They have no connection with that history increasingly. And thanks to, by the way, the current economic squeeze that most South Africans are finding themselves. So the immediate issue for them is that I don't have a job. I won't have something to put on the table tonight. My kids won't be able to carry anything to school tomorrow. In fact, I don't have enough money to go to work or to go search for employment opportunity. When the nation as a whole is consumed by its own crisis, Palestine becomes very far for them.
No, just still on that. I mean, I'm glad you're raising that because I do think it is also like, I mean, the working class in this country continue to fight. I mean, I had a conversation yesterday, I think, for another podcast, and I made a point that one slander you can ever see against the black working class in this country is that they're not fighting. We have the highest number of protests per capita in the whole world, in all the main theaters. The question, I think, for us is how do we connect that with the struggles and solidarity with the people of Palestine and other oppressed people everywhere? And I think we have seen, very rare but shiny example of that. You formed part of the leadership of the Clover strike, you negotiated, you know how they tried to say we must abandon the issue, the demand for divestment of the Israeli consortium that bought, we obviously stood our ground, but the enormity of support, even amongst ordinary workers of Clover, for me, is testament to what is possible. How do we rebuild those connections between people fighting for their own survival and solidarity and understanding that actually will only win as part of the global struggle against capitalism, imperialism, and all these oppressions?
One of the tragedies that has befallen us is the weakening of solidarity, just as a word. Is solidarity as meaning I care about what is happening next door. I care about what is happening in our school, in our police station. And I care about the 5 big protest actions that are happening today. I find out what is the issue driving 12,000, 13,000 protests every year in South Africa, according to the police reports. And that and that's the first point. Second to that, very importantly, there is a growing conservatism driven by the middle strata of society, the middle class, and indebted to nobody's business, swimming in their own crisis, fighting the glass ceilings at work alone without solidarity from the broader working class. So there's not only the death of solidarity between those who used to stay in the townships and who were articulating the grievances of the majority, and who have now moved to stay in the suburbs,
Social polarization.
and what totally cut off from that practice of an injury to one is an injury to all, surviving and on their own, isolated in those suburbs, disconnected from even their own families who remain in the townships. It's a big, big, big factor. What then drives, even Lenin admitted that society's gauge is the middle class. What will happen in the society, you first to understand it from the middle strata of society, because they stand in between the most downtrodden class and the higher class. In their nature, they look up for their own survival as well as for their own advancement. So they're more likely to know what is happening below because of the family, but they also because of their own battles, but they also
aspirations.
looking upstairs for to aspire. In South Africa, they are becoming conservative, and today they are driving this xenophobia, Afrophobia. The world have ended. Scenarios. There's no more point of marching. You are wasting your time. How many times have we been marching? We have been marching when we were still young. What have that changed? They even undermine their own victories today. They don't know that the victory of having a maternity leave is so important. The lunch time, the tea break, the overtime, the compensation for Sunday work. These things, they say they are denying them. This thing doesn't work. And unfortunately, they are dragging a significant number of the working class. And
because they dominate media, they dominate reproduction of ideas, basically.
Look at them in the media. They do not cover anymore those 5,000 major service delivery protests. The only time they will ever talk about it is when the protesters occupy an important highway where they will be inconvenienced on their way to work. So certainly avoid R59 or N1 at that corner and that corner of that intersection. That's how they relate to the protest action. Never about what happened. Never about what is really driving this. So there is a dangerous gap that is emerging between the working class and the middle strata. Worst of all, the exploiting class, which only relate to workers as machines again, who must come in time so that we can increase our levels of productivity.
But how do we, and I think that question remains, Comrade Vavi, how do we still build on these small but shiny examples? And I think we've seen it in Italy, right? There was a big strike. And in Italy, government there is right-wing, in the mold of Donald Trump, right? But it is also where we've seen the biggest mobilization of the working class and the gender strike in solidarity with people of Palestine. And it was clear to me that there was connection between the grievances, the day-to-day struggles of the working class, which is also fighting its own self. I mean, Italy is one of the poorest European countries at the present moment. And of course, they were still able to do. Is there a way that in South Africa, is there a way that the workers' movement here can be able to rekindle a spirit like that? And we have the likes of Clover, 1,000, 10,000 times.
SAFTU has been preaching, to use that word, since its inception 9 years ago, that one of the important challenges we must overcome is that of rebuilding solidarity between organized workers and the unemployed women. And we have been failing. I mean, we've had 3 summits between 2018 and to date. And every time we come out with strong declaration about the need to build this solidarity, it has not come out or come off the ground. So we must continue to hammer the point about the need for unity, because it is only when we speak about us ourselves as the class, as the exploited class, that we can then find a connection between our local struggles and international struggles. There can never be international solidarity about international
when the
issues.
working class feel too disunited and weak
and,
to take its own
and
local
practicing no solidarity at the home front. It's absolutely important that we reconnect the classes and the most downtrodden classes together before we can even have a hope of doing the same everywhere. One of, for example, my criticism that I voiced in one of the big rallies in Potchefstroom about even the Muslim community is that they tend to focus on one issue. They pass the protest on water and on sewerage flowing in the streets, and they call on the poor to join a protest on Palestine. And then people say, no, hold on. We have a water crisis here, which we have not said anything or mobilized communities about. So we've got to do that. And I know that we are now pressed for time. I think that let's go back to what I think we should do as we go. What we need now is to campaign for the immediate and permanent ceasefire in Palestine. What we need is a complete withdrawal of the Israeli occupiers from Palestine, the lifting of the siege on Gaza, the implementation of a comprehensive boycott, sanctions, and divestment against the racist apartheid Israeli regime. And that's why we need to increase the levels of consciousness in South Africa that they do not touch any good destined to or coming from Israel. What we need is an immediate global arms embargo against Israel, the prosecution of the people who are driving the war crimes and the massacres and the genocide, including in America, including those South Africans who go and participate in that genocide in Palestine. But more importantly, what we need is to campaign for the return of all Palestinians all over the refugee camps back home with their guaranteed citizenship. And so that's the battle that we must continue to wage in South Africa, and hope that growing numbers of people will join. Tomorrow we are in Cape Town commemorating Nakba, and we can only wish that all the people of Cape Town will join us in the city center tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Chief. And I think it has been a pleasure having you. We will be continuing with the show with the two of our guests. But we wish you thank you and hopefully a success for tomorrow's events and commemorations.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
It was a pleasure.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists, with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities, conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities. Your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
This Eid-ul-Adha, your Qurbani can reach someone who truly needs it. Across South Africa and Malawi, families are not thinking about celebrations. They are simply hoping for a meal. With Ashraful Aid, your Qurbani is is delivered directly to those in need, making your sacrifice meaningful. Fulfill your obligation. Feed a family. Give hope this Eid. Visit ashrafulaid.org and donate today. Ashraful Aid, with humanity, for humanity.
Hey, Gulam.
Yeah?
Did I return your lawnmower last month?
No, bye, you didn't.
Oh, no. Now what'll I do? I wanted to borrow it again, man.
With Randry Jewelers, you won't have to borrow or lend because the prices are so well trimmed on all gold and diamond jewelry. Alternatively, we could remake your old jewelry into a brilliant new design. Visit Randry Jewelers at 151 Stevens Lamini Road, Musgrave, Durban. Randry Jewelers, the family name you can trust.
With the increase of different problems over our heads, we can't just focus on the past. We need to maintain our presence in the present and to enhance it for the future. We need to maintain our old mosque and to prevent it from being taken from our hands, and making the Aqsa free for them on Friday, which is the most crowded in the week. It means that they are looking and they are marching toward the collision. They want either to collide with the people, suppress them, or to just make disaster. You Muslims of South Africa especially, we are missing you. You used to be in the masjid at these events. It used to fill the city. Even if you are not allowed, even if there are some obstacles, you will get the reward. You will have much more reward when you come in harder times. They showing their link to the Masjid al-Aqsa and devotion to the Muslim cause, because our Masjid al-Aqsa cause is not a local issue. It is for all Muslim and for everyone who believes that the Masjid al-Aqsa is part of their belief, and they should be with us in this hard time.
Jerusalem-based historian, specialist on the history of Al-Aqsa Mosque, and author Dr. Ihab Jalad.
This is Salam Media.
Africa. Give the gift of clean water with Africa Muslims Agency. With every water well or borehole you donate, your drop becomes a river, reconnecting communities to nourishment, education, dignity and empowerment. Sponsor a water well for 17,000 Rand in Africa, or a borehole for 65,000 Rand in Afghanistan or Africa. Quench the thirst. Reconnect the soul with Africa Muslims Agency.
Are you banking with convenience, transparency, and flexibility? With Al Barakah Bank's transactional banking account, you can enjoy convenient everyday banking designed around your needs. Benefit from zero fees on point-of-sale transactions and manage your banking easily through Al Barakah's secure mobile banking app and internet banking platform. From everyday payments to managing your personal or business banking, Al Barakah makes banking simple, transparent, and convenient. Visit albarakah.co.za to learn more. Al Barakah, your partner bank. Al Barakah Bank Limited is an authorized financial services and credit provider.
As the blessed days of Dhul Hijjah arrive, hearts across the world turn towards the sacred lands of Makkah. Millions begin a journey not only across borders, but towards Allah. A journey of surrender, humility, forgiveness, and mercy. The words, Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik, rise into the skies. Tears fall in sincere dua, and the Ummah stands united before its Creator. This is the season of Hajj, a season of spiritual awakening. Join Salam Media every weekday at 9:50 a.m. on News and Views as we bring you Hajj diaries filled with spiritual reflections, special broadcasts, du'as, live updates, and inspiring voices from the Holy Land.
For me personally, this has been something really incredible because I always tell people that I'm nothing, just a boy from the Kasi who didn't really see much in life, but because of my parents' prayers, my parents' du'as, more specifically my mother, she is the pillar of all the things that I've seen in life which are termed as success.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
Welcome back to this special edition once again. Just to remind those that have just all joined us, that is a special edition to commemorate 78 years since Nakba in 1948, a day or rather a year that Palestinians caused a catastrophe, and of course, to commemorate the massacres, the land dispossessions, and everything that went on basically to cleanse the area of Palestinians and lay the foundation for the current Israeli state that continues to wage war, that continue to be waging genocides, occupations, and all sorts of violence, colonial violence against the Palestinian people. Now, remaining with me in studio now is Rivonia Pillay from Global Swimming Flotilla, and Comrade Patrick Bond, who is he is actually a part of the GIWUSA media work, but also a lecturer at UJ, as well as from the South African Energy Embargo for Palestine. Just to build on the discussions that we've been having, hundreds of refugees were removed from their homes. How do we get them there? How do we get justice for them? What does that justice look like? Today, 78 years later, and the 78 years have been joined by many others, because in many ways, Nakba continued. The massacres are the recurrent feature of the Palestinian lives, the evictions, destruction of villages, of towns, and in fact, we are right in the middle of it now in Gaza, but also in West Bank. What does justice for all the refugees and Palestinians look like today?
Firstly, I'd like to say thank you from the Global Swimming Flotilla South Africa team. Our sea and land convoys are ready and on their way, so we send our best wishes to them. And our comrades after Richards Bay for their big protest movement.
We'll actually come back to that.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that.
I think, justice can't be defined by people who don't belong to the land. So the first thing we have to understand is the Palestinian right to self-determination. That's at the core of all of this. Our fight is alongside them. It's not on behalf. And that's one core thing we need to remember. And another way to look at it is the South African history. What did justice look like for us? You have to remove an oppressive system in order for there to be justice, in order for there to be the pursuit of peace. No justice, no peace. So I think, one, we have to stop these oppressive systems. Two, there must be a call for the ceasefire, for these illegal blockades, for anything that is systematically preventing Palestinians to live a self-determined life. And then we have to come in as a global solidarity movement to help build. The destruction is immeasurable at this point. And so to allow them to have that justice and to get back their lands, their farms, their homes, there must be a global movement to help build once we remove this oppressive entity.
Thank you. Comrade Patrick?
Let's just see if the microphone is working now. Yeah, I think everything that's been said is absolutely correct. I would even go further that the South African model for at least removing that oppressor has two very useful features. One is the term one person, one vote in a unitary state, and how that applies to the Nakba as a basic principle is that the right of return, which even the United Nations gave some official support to from the late 1940s, those 750,000 people and their descendants being able to get back land that, as you and Zwelinzima Vavi pointed out, was taken 78 years ago, just through brutal force, through mass murder by the Israelis. So to get that is not that dissimilar to the demand that there be one person, one vote in a unitary state. It doesn't mean the expulsion of Israelis no more than did one person, one vote in the unitary state mean the expulsion of white South Africans. There was no, push them into the sea sort of politics. But I think what's crucial is that the way to get there, the second comparison to South Africa, is through boycott, divestment, sanctions, in addition to the rest of the liberation movement's activities and all kinds of solidarity and awareness raising and pressure campaigns. And the BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, is what helped in South Africa. I was personally politicized by the way in which Black South Africans called for sanctions against the white regime, and that included financial sanctions. And in 1985, if you can think back over 40 years ago, there was a moment when heeding that call, many people in the US and Europe and Asia, Latin America, they were able to put enough pressure that there were no further banking relationships. There were obviously some flows of funds back and forth, but new loans stopped. And indeed, at one point in August 1985, right after P.W. Botha, the then apartheid president, he did the so-called Rubicon speech, and he failed to make any substantive changes. And as a result, the politics were to have a full-fledged financial boycott and to call in loans.
On that, Patrick, just to follow up, because I want to return to the question of flotilla, but just on that issue that you are raising, right? We've always said, the boycotts, divestments, and all of that are always very effective when they are targeted, and we concentrate on a point of attack. Do you think there are specific vulnerabilities of the Israeli regime today that we can capitalize on? What are those, especially that are much more strategic for a focus for a movement in South Africa?
Well, the most crucial, and the movement has decided this, is to end South Africa's coal supply. There are a couple of others. We're very interested in whether Rheinmetall and Denel are supplying weapons. I happen to be in Berlin at the moment, and Rheinmetall has lots of factories here, and they're getting weapons from the 3 Rheinmetall Denel factories that are operating overtime. There's another arms dealer in South Africa, Ivor Ichikowitz. His company, Paramount Group, in 2021 opened up a Tel Aviv office, and he's been a very strong Zionist, and he was the #1 campaign financier of the ANC because he comes from the sort of white liberal tradition, and he was supporting the ANC and giving Jacob Zuma lifts around on his airplane to do all sorts of deals. But he broke those relations after October 2023 and has written very hostile arguments against South Africa's attempt to take the Israelis to the International Court of Justice. So we have a couple of arms deal problems. There are also grapes that go, but the crucial one, Mametlwe, is the coal, which is now over 3.5 million tons since the genocide began in October 2023. 3.5 million tons, mostly from the Mpumalanga coalfields of Glencore and of Patrice Motsepe's African Rainbow Minerals. And if you can cut that, you're cutting the entire supply of coal, because Colombia used to send coal until last August. They were the #1 supplier, also with Glencore and a US company. And that meant that what we've got, I think, with regular protests and high consciousness about the hypocrisy of President Ramaphosa's own brother-in-law, Patrice Motsepe, profiting, in other words, Ramaphosa in the family profiting from coal, even though he acknowledges, he recognizes and leads the world campaign to call this a genocide. And in the Hague group, which was put together mainly by Colombia and South Africa with other countries like Namibia, there is a call not to make military fuel available. And yet that's being violated because the coal that goes into the Israeli coal-fired power plants, and as I say, it's 3.5 million tons from South Africa. And that right now, we're the only known supplier of coal. And that means that we are supplying the military for the genocide and also for the war in Iran and for all the damage that's doing across this continent and across the world.
That's very chilling. That you could accuse, the state of committing a genocide yet, profiteer from those that are actually in the market, like Colombia, taking their place and increasing their supply. That for me, especially after we have asked the world to boycott apartheid government for killing, 68 people in Chad.
And we could even argue further, Mametlwe, that the ways in which this coal supply is going is hotly contested and has been raised in the parliament by one of the smaller parties, at which point the minister mainly responsible for our international trade, Parks Tau, simply said, no, we won't violate the World Trade Organization non-discrimination policies. Now that's a nonsense, given the WTO is so kaput and useless. But I think the main thing, when the BDS coalition here in South Africa was able to actually meet Parks Tau, he had really nothing to say aside from, we will choose our tactics when we want to. And so they weren't going to be pushed to break this relationship. And that's why today and tomorrow we have protesters from our movement led by our Durban branch, but there are very good people in Richards Bay actually going to protest at the docks at Richards Bay.
I want to come to that, Patrick, because I know that number of our comrades are going to Richards Bay today. And I think for me, that speaks to some of the concrete actions in respect of which I think ordinary South Africans can be able to take in supporting the movement and actually making our voice to be heard. But I think I want to just talk to Rivonia here about Global Summit Flotilla. I know it has been intercepted. What is the state now? Where are we? Because this is a campaign that captured the imagination. I must say to you that as somebody who has been organizing the space, I quite frankly initially, underestimated the impact it would have until, the last one. And I think probably it was big here, given the circumstances around it. I mean, by the time that the participant from South Africa arrived at OR Tambo, it was a massive thing that, and I think it was incredible work. Where are we with the flotilla now? With the interception, with the people arrested, and yeah.
Thanks. So yes, there was an unlawful interception that happened with 22 boats. 175 of the delegates were taken hostage. And all of these, go against a lot of the Universal Conventions. It breaks the Rome Statute. Goes against the Genocide Convention. There's a lot of things that protect civilians on a humanitarian mission against being captured and against their humanitarian cargo being taken, which has happened. Luckily, as Sumud, the resilience of these delegates, they have now reconvened. And as of yesterday, they are all sailing. There's over 50 boats sailing on their way to Gaza right this moment. Of that, we have 6 delegates from South Africa, incredible people, none of them of any extraordinary positioning, many ordinary South African students, parents, chefs, one of whom was then cooking for the other delegates to create solidarity amongst the international delegates. So they are at the moment on the waters sailing successfully towards Gaza. In collaboration with that, we have the Global Relief Land Convoy. Now, this is really important because besides the blockade on the sea, there is a blockade at Rafah. And, we talked about this solidarity across the continent. As part of the mission, there's a Kenyan comrade that joined us, Comrade Ombok. And he joined our mission because he said, he sees the similarities on the ground that they're facing from these capitalist interests and wanted to join the campaign. But on the land convoy, this is a journey across North Africa, which, we go through different African countries, making our way to show that there is solidarity. We just don't get a lot of attention on the ground.
because it doesn't, it's not as high flying as some of the other more maybe negative, dramatic things that we might see. And it's important to keep our eyes on them, on the sea convoy and on the land. On the land, what they're taking with them is very specialized medical care, ambulances, doctors, nurses, veterinarians, and food, because starvation has been used as a weapon in this war. So they will take with them all of this to Rafah. And while we keep our eyes on them, our attention must always be on the Palestinian people. While we sit here, the siege in the West Bank is increasing. As of March, no food, no humanitarian aid has entered Gaza. So the decline of health of children, of people is at an exponential rate. So this flotilla and this land convoy is a global humanitarian, peaceful attempt at breaking this.
But, and I think I want to just build on that. I mean, a lot of people think the genocide, I mean, obviously there's been, I would say, decline in intensity of the military operation. We shouldn't, talk ourselves into demoralizing. I mean, the movement did exert pressure, but, and this is what worries me, that people think that it is basically over. The ceasefire, the situation there is returning to normal, there's reconstruction. Tell us more about what you are picking about the situation on the ground. And I think I want to come to also the issue of how do we use the global flotilla, right, to raise consciousness, to connect with the movement on the ground. You have said quite correctly, people see connections between what is happening in Palestine with, the struggle against capitalism, its exploitation, its oppressions. How do we use a movement to connect with the struggle here? But first, what is happening in Palestine today? And why should South African workers and poor who are faced with their own challenges care?
Great questions. So on the ground, unfortunately, it's not decreasing in intensity. We're just not getting as much coverage of it anymore. I wear this T-shirt with so many journalists' names on it. When I first bought this, a lot of them were alive and now they're not. And so we're losing coverage on the ground from Palestinian people to the rest of the world. And so maybe the narrative or the picture looks less intense. But like I said, since March, the supposed ceasefire that allows aid in, it's not true. There's not food going in, water, aid, medicine. Hospitals have been bombed, schools have been bombed. None of that has been rebuilt. The yellow line that they said that they will put together is becoming, it's more restrictive to the movement of the Palestinian people. In the West Bank, there's a lot of activists on the ground using their bodies to protect a lot of these Palestinian homes, because the settlers have now increased their steps to reduce
I've seen it, and certainly it's almost like they moved from Gaza to West Bank, because the level of violence in West Bank wasn't like that, about 2-3 years ago. But every time I look at West Bank, it's resembling more and more of Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, when you starve, decimate a people, and weaken them, you can control, right? And so in the West Bank, there are more people that have established homes, firstly, that weren't in that intensity. But now the focus there is to use Israeli citizens, if we can call them that, to put pressure on the ground and to force them. We talked about this coal issue, but 0.75 of our coal production is fueling 88% of their coal usage there. And it's very centralized control. So these settler communities that are going in to take over Palestinian land, they're ruining a lot of the water infrastructure, a lot of the limited electricity supply, but they're being fueled by the Zionist entity, the Israeli government, through this coal that we are now supplying. And so when you have a powered, very coordinated system, because the settlers go in, if they're identified by the government, they get more supplies. and then they're increasing basically manipulating and the systems that keep those Palestinians' homes running. So yeah, it's completely correct. It's increasing there as well.
I mean, Comrade Patrick, maybe I think this is where you need to be able to come in the light of this. How do we basically break the supply? It's very clear we can't rely on the government. It's very clear that this president who has been praised all over the world, I mean, is personally, if you take family relations into context, benefiting from this continuous supply of coal. Our comrades today are at Richards Bay, to try and stop a ship. But what can many of us who can make it to Richards Bay, what can we do? What are the forces that we need to be able to organize? I mean, amongst ourselves and, to build solidarity there.
Yes, let's actually remind ourselves what Zwelinzima Vavi had said, to think about these balance of forces and how we can shift it in a way that makes a coal embargo of Israel possible. And I think it's two of the groups that you two have already put onto the table, one being the Zion Christian Church and their very strong promoter, who is Patrice Motsepe, the same man at African Rainbow Minerals, making millions of rands, tens of millions of rands worth from coal. And I think that's crucial to be able to understand that Motsepe brings the Rabbi Warren Goldstein, the chief rabbi, to talk pro-Israeli ideology to the group 110,000 strong that meets every year at the Soccer City. That's on November 30 last year. And your viewers can see it on YouTube. It's quite appalling. The second group are the xenophobes. But the third group of fascists that I think are maybe making more progress than we would like to admit includes Zionists. And the key guy is Rob Hersoff. And these aren't just working class black people in ZTC or xenophobes confused as to fighting the other instead of their real problems. These are more conscious, especially with Hersoff having very openly in November 2023 said to Palestine solidarity activists on C Point, which is also widely circulated on social media, F these guys when he saw Palestine flag. So you get a sense that there's quite an extraordinary, because Hersoff has his Truth Report and a very large following, and Biz News supports him. So we do have, obviously, white, rich people. And I would put at Glencore, a crucial figure is Jill Marcus. Now, she used to be President Mandela's spokesperson, and she used to be the Reserve Bank governor and deputy finance minister, head of ABSA, but she's been on the board of Glencore. And when asked at the Glencore annual general meeting a couple of years ago about this, she was a stone silent. Her colleague, who's the CEO, is from Johannesburg, Gary Nagel. His predecessor, also from Johannesburg, his name Ivan Glassenberg, and he presided over massive corruption by Glencore over many African countries, and they were actually prosecuted and paid huge fines. Now, interestingly, at that time, their main ally in South Africa was Cyril Ramaphosa and his Shanduka. So they had the Optimum Mine as a sort of joint venture. So these are some of the connections that unveil within this broader elite our problems of defeating the absolutely immoral sale of coal to Israel. And what I think we need to do, not only today, tomorrow, if any of your viewers are able to get to Richards Bay and join the protest, but also as in a broader week of action next week, we're going to be protesting at Glencore at its annual general meeting. So these are parts, because Glencore has a Johannesburg Stock Exchange listing asking not just the company and Jill Marcus, the key board member, not just Patrice Motsepe, the main partner here, but also the JSE, which should have some...
On that picture, how do we, and this is a question I was asking Comrade Vavi, right? With the South African energy embargo, and I think the point he was making is that, I mean, the challenge for us in the movement here is to build the connection between the oppression, the strugglers, but also solidarity with the Palestinian people, with the existing local strikers.
Yeah.
We know are strikers of the mine workers against Glencore. We know that there are strikers of the communities, mine affected communities. I mean, I work with a lot of those. I know that they've participated, in the movement. We have been having a challenge with the mine workers. How do we concretely build those connections with an ordinary people who have the most disparate situations of unemployment, but also a climate as well as environmental disaster of pollution that we see in Mpumalanga, in KZN, and other areas?
In Cape Town, just the last a few days with the terrible flooding and the inability of our cities to build stormwater drainage and pumping and decent infrastructure, good housing, all of these fit into the same broad struggle, don't they? Because the coal that is burned in the Israeli coal-fired power plants are killing people in Gaza, in southern Lebanon, all over the region in Iran. And that coal is also, when you emit a ton of it, we've sent 3.5 million tons, you're then creating 2.6 tons of carbon dioxide. And each of those tons, as it does damage over the course of the coming decades, is expected to cost the world society $1,200, or about 20,000 Rand. Now, when you say 20,000 Rand is the damage being done by sending coal from Mpumalanga over to Richards Bay and then on the ships all around the west coast of Africa, and then it's burned and it does this 20,000 Rand damage, we're not seeing anything like the compensation, just as you say, Mametlwe, to the mining affected communities united in action. And the people, especially around Ochis, where at the Mpunzi and Tweefontein complex, the mine workers are keeping their jobs through expansion of coal. We have about 51 million tons of coal per year coming out of South Africa, and a huge amount is in Mpumalanga. And the crucial thing is to be able to say to those communities and to the workers, it's National Union of Mine Workers, but it's also the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union. And most important, the main union in Glencore is the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, the biggest union, which, all three of them notionally, well, with the exception of AMCU, but the other two have very good positions rhetorically against the genocide, yet their own workers, along with SAFTU and UNTU, the two main transport workers unions, which are bringing the coal from Mpumalanga over to Richards Bay and helping it get out of the port. There are also another dozen major companies that profit because they have ownership of the Richards Bay coal terminal. So what we must do is bring all of these targets and all of the potential of labor, community, environmentalists locally, and climate activists globally with Palestine. And that's the kind of thing that in the Samut Flotilla we've seen. We've seen the ability of someone like Greta Thunberg to be able to raise consciousness among the climate activists who really do love what she's been able to do since 2018, when she began to really mobilize globally for youth, for Fridays for Future. And that sense of the next generations, the youth, being able to link the issues in a way that typically, as Vavi himself admitted, right, labor and community and environment and women, and they're often in silos, they work without the kind of interlinkages. So I see as somebody who often looks at these social movements as being sometimes a little bit too fragmented, or they have popcorn protests. They pop up and then they fall back down. That this is actually one area that's going to be crucial. It's not just in South Africa, but the whole world has these two wonderful movements, maybe a third one as well, which is Stop Donald Trump and Stop Elon Musk. And if we can be able to kind of put these together in a way that has much more of that let's say, militancy that comes from knowing that each of our fights is vital to the success of each other's fights. Yeah, that's, I think, the way forward.
And I just want to pick it up there and bring Renwena into that point, right? I think Comrade Patrick is raising an issue here. How do we build the solidarities? I mean, as part basically of rebuilding our own movement to fight our own struggles as well, because that, principle, the foundation of a movement is principle that an injured one is injured to all, not only within the country, but everywhere.
Yeah.
But that has been, a mountain to climb, that is to realize in practice, right? And that's the reason we have unions with good positions that can translate them into actions. Why? Because, many of the unionists would say, well, we have struggles around wage, we have our own health challenges. But of course, I mean, we know coal has sulfur. It's not just issue of the bigger impacts of climate.
Yeah.
It's also the immediate health impact on the workers. But Comrade 5 also raised another important issue, right? That The problem with the current Palestinian Solidarity movement is you have the comrades in the movement working past struggle for water, struggle for electricity, struggle for jobs. Workers in a company that are facing exploitation. We're not part of that. From the perspective of global, Sumut flotilla, how do we use that flotilla to connect with the local struggles in a way that I think the movement did brilliantly very well, by the way, with Clover, because we're able to succeed there because of the real solidarity that comrades gave. I mean, as GIWUSA leadership, we've always been preaching that, right? Solidarity with Palestine. And so we took that position legally first and then escalated to action later. How do we use flotilla to a level that was reached in Italy, for instance? We had a lot of coverage last year. How are we connecting with local strugglers?
I hear you. So I do hear the criticism or critique of why focus there when there's struggle here. And the point is it's all interconnected, right? So I think intersectionality is this great thing we talk about, but what does that mean practically? And the point of this global Sumut Flotilla South Africa specifically is to connect with all the local movements on the ground. It's not just what are we doing when we're going to Palestine through sea or land. It's to connect with all the movements on the ground. Now, Richards Bay is a great example of this. And I want to go back to the state responsibility thing. I know we always say, we don't trust politics, the state has failed us, but we must understand that the states or all states that have identified genocide have a responsibility to mitigate it and to stop complicity in all ways. And we mustn't fold on that. I agree it's not as responsive as we like it to be, but that is one lever we must always push. So we don't get to allow our government and our state officials to shy away from this. But in Richards Bay, what's happening now is we're bringing together all these movements. So it's yes, the unions, it's the mining affected communities from Mpumalanga, it's some comrades from Potch that have identified a lot of local issues around climate, but also around justice and jobs. It's people from Johannesburg, from the Western Cape, from KZN, and it's going to be one of these multifaceted workshops around what does states' ideological political movement, political action look like in terms of local implementation, and what does that mean in terms of our global solidarity. So, for example, if a state allows a company like Glencore to run and to affect these mining affected communities in terms of it allowing this extractivist corporate to have low wage or poor working environments, allow these climate impacts to affect these communities that don't have a lot of financial stability in them, that is also a state that is allowing this corporate complicity with coal going to Palestine. So we must call for this ideological strength that we had in our anti-apartheid fights back when we were moving together as a movement, and call back that into our government system and into our political leadership. Because if they allow that to happen here, they're allowing that to happen there. And it's a connected thing. Our political will and our political leadership determines a lot of the environment. So I think bringing all these leaders and all these members of unions, of movements, of activists, just community members, Richards Bay, a lot of the community members there, they don't belong to specific organizations, but they're invited, and they have a community member speaking at this event over the weekend. It is to allow this conversation to happen in order to connect us, because we've been siloed too much. And when you silo people, you remove the power of their agency.
And that's so I mean, last year, I mean, like it was, is it last year or year before, when we had an event at the airport there. Very brilliant coverage. I mean, I was, part of the people that were, doing sort of a background work in terms of facilitation of the conference, right? Very brilliant, and I think very important issues were raised there. But I felt one of the things that was missing was to highlight the problems of the hypocrisy. It was almost like we're just lining up with South African government because it took, Israel to ICJ. I mean, the case we welcome because I think it managed to shine light as well as to give sort of platforms for many of the states to join and I think begin to, show like what are the problems in international law, right, of what is happening there. But I also think like, Patrick made a point about how we can't rely on the states and all the institutions of the elite. South African government is a textbook epitome of political hypocrisy. I felt that was missed in highlighting that. Are we reflecting on that as Global Summit Flotilla?
Absolutely.
What are we going to be doing about that?
So firstly, we are proud of leading the charge at the ICJ, right? We must be clear that as one of the first countries to even table this in an international forum, we have to understand that it's because of our linked apartheid struggle. So yes, great work, gold star, 5 stars.
And the work that we continue to be doing today.
Exactly. And all the evidence we continue to put in front of those bodies. But practically, you're 100% correct. There's a huge contradiction. And I think that's reflected in the way South Africa looks today, right? We have our freedoms. We're a free country, but economic freedom, was that really achieved? Economic justice? And so when it comes to the practicalization of the solidarity thing, it's not just a word, it's not just a speech, it's in action. And as a solidarity movement, the Global Summit Flotilla South Africa is pointing that out. We're calling on our state to look at our co-chair at the Hague Group, Colombia, that took a hard stance. There was the first move to have this coal embargo, and then corporates found a loophole. And then the president said, no, full sanctions, complete embargo. And then he looked at his country and said, let's monitor what's happening now internally and how we navigate that. That needs to happen here. And we're calling on that as the flotilla as well. It's not just great that we took the case forward. Practically, we have to follow through on what that means and what our obligation as a state that is against genocide requires us to do, which is stop complicity. So especially for today, it's Nakba Day. This weekend's going to be this Richards Bay direct action. We'll continue with the flotilla movement messaging, the Glencore Day. We call on all South Africans who believe in justice and achieving this for South Africans and for the global community to send through messages, put on this pressure. I mean, Tiago and Saif were released because of global pressure. They could have continued being held hostage and tortured, but there's this huge global movement of pressure. So all South Africans, find us on, I'll have to do my job, South Africa _Global Sumud. Please send through your messages. Be very clear about what you want, what you require this government to do, and how we must move forward in the solidarity movement, connecting our local issues.
Just short before I bring Patrick for the last word on this. That's the thing, right? We always say, as my access to that, a domestic policy of any government is a continuation, or foreign policy is a continuation of a domestic policy.
Absolutely.
So the connection between the betrayals of the Palestinians and the betrayals of the working class here, concretely, just in a few seconds, how are we going to be using, and I know that you spoke in general terms, how are we going to be using Global Flotilla to support those workers at Clover who continue to be facing exploitation, massive retrenchments, and actually I see the companies trying to turn that is because of our solidarity with Palestinians that we're having this. How do we link with them concretely? Right? There is that. They are still very determined. I think they continue to come to Palestinian solidarity protests. How do we strengthen them, in their struggle again? How do we connect with the communities, but also many other workplaces with a powerful Zionist interest? Because I think the reason government is not moving is because of a powerful Zionist cooperate, imperialist and domestic capitalist interest in the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the members of this Sumud flotilla movement have been in decades and decades of whether it was anti-apartheid struggles against capitalists, against environmental extractivism. So we are all linked in. Where this team was actually pulled together because of their decades of experience, and we mustn't see it as a separate thing. This is a coming together for one specific focus, but all of us are interconnected, which is how Richards Bay is happening. So I think remembering to keep the focus on these local issues, calling out all of these interests that affect the way South African economy and financial systems work. And, the other part of it is that people might question this coal thing and the impact on South Africa, but already, because of this war, the supply chain that has been affected, the imports that have been affected, it's hugely affecting South Africans' pockets. So even if we didn't have solidarity right now, we're being impacted right in this moment because of the interest of the US and Israel.
The oil prices, the
oil
cost of living crisis,
I mean, it's incredibly
transport,
difficult.
Food, everything.
Absolutely. So we're being affected now, and that narrative, I think it's important for how we frame this movement. And that's what the South African contingent of this Global Sumud Flotilla is doing, because it, like you said, it is an interconnected thing. And we must point out those very small, potentially 1%ers, the Bernie Sanders thing, of who controls a lot of the companies, and call that out.
Comrade Patrick, just to bring you for a final word, what is our next step in these campaigns? And what is it that ordinary South Africans that want to join our organization, our movement, can be able to do?
Well, the main thing for us is to keep the activism strong, but we also have a team of lawyers. So I would hope all the viewers might have a chance to go to their screens and find under Google SABDS Coalition. SABDS Coalition is one word. And you'll be able to download Sirhan Khan's wonderful 280-page critique, a legal critique. And that may mean, as we've been threatening for about a month, that there could be some legal ramifications to the violation of South Africa's own export laws, the Hague Group agreements, the United Nations, even the International Court of Justice has effectively called for BDS on South African coal back in mid-2024 when they issued their finding on Israel's occupation of the West Bank. So we have a lot of, let's say...
That case, Patrick, just before we proceed with other things, why are we with that case? Well, what I'm saying is that, I know that Khan has has compiled a very brilliant dossier. Where is it? And I'm interested also because, I'm at Tunisia College of Law, right? And I've always been wondering, what can our college do just in terms of highlighting the legal issues and raising consciousness in the process of that, but also just supporting the brilliant effort of Comrade Khan.
Yes, Sirhan Khan's major document is there for everyone to see, to download at sabdscoalition.org. Now, what I think is going to happen, because the last few weeks have been spent sharing this documentation with various ministers across the cabinet who have some relevance to the export of coal and the illegalities that it entails when it's coal sent to Israel. Now, what I suspect we're going to see more of is now some test cases in the courts. And one of them might go in the other direction, which we've been hinting at, which is the International Court of Justice also saying last July that the victims of climate change will have some basis for demanding reparations against the polluters, the emitters. And that was in a case by 27 school children in Vanuatu. And I'm hoping we begin to merge these and say to Glencore and to African Rainbow Minerals and to the other dozen companies, all the big coal companies that own the Richards Bay coal terminal, that they're going to owe reparations for the climate, but also for the damage done to Palestinians. Now, the reparations cases I think we should be preparing for because they are real and they've affected, for example, Namibians who are able to get over €1 billion from the Germans. Of course, reparations are being paid by Germans to victims of the Holocaust, to the Israeli state. So the concept of paying reparations now also looms as something we want to be able to warn the entire society against. The more coal we export. By the way, the news today has Barbara Creasy, our transport minister, former environment minister, approving more privatizations precisely so as to increase South Africa's export of coal, which at one point was 70 million tons a year. It went down to 47 million 3 or 4 years ago. Now, those are the sorts of politics that I think can bring us all in and do exactly what Ravonia is suggesting, that we need broader fronts, and also to, I think, raise one crucial question. Where's the 200 billion rand in the Just Energy Transition Partnership that should go from the presidency to help decarbonize, starting with the Mpumalanga coal mines? And yet the leader of that office, Johan Yawich, is nowhere to be seen in, for example, saying to coal miners, coal workers, coal-fired power plant operators, we do have alternative means of employment for you. If you do lose your job because of the 0.5% or so, perhaps a little bit closer to 1.5% of the coal that goes to Israel, and that stops, well, we have other jobs for you. And I think we've been weak on that front in our Palestine solidarity, our climate, our environment, our community movements, and our labor movements, and saying, hey, that 200 billion rand for the Just Energy Transition Partnership, which actually Europeans have funded on an unfortunate way, debt-based. But anyway, that should be used to stop the flow of coal to Israel and to reimburse any workers or communities adversely affected. So let's all move on these multiple fronts and find more chances for activism coming up in the days and the weeks ahead, such as the Glencore protests during their annual general meeting next week.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I think it has been a very engaging discussion, and there's been pleasure having and also hosting you here for this important anniversary. And I must also thank you for the incredible work that you do, because I think now than ever before, raising and keeping flying the flag of Palestine, is much more important, particularly given the attacks that are happening, but also the growing violence against the people of West Asia. I mean, that's the worst region to be living in at the moment.
West Asia.
The war has expanded to Iran. Lebanon is a catastrophe on its own right, probably much more worse than Palestine as we're speaking when you look at the level of bombing there and so on. And I think it's a continuation basically of the same war and genocide that I started there. On that note, I should say that unfortunately time is run, but we should have this conversation more. I'm certainly interested in the dossier, and I think I'll be wanting to have conversation with principals at University of South Africa College of Law, and to see if we can host conversations and strengthening the legal case in terms of what could be done, but also just to raise consciousness about complicity of South Africa in the crimes of Zionism and imperialism against the people of Palestine, but increasingly so of West Asia at large. Crimes that are affecting us. The increases in oil prices, the increases in food, the crushing cost of living crisis, all of this, we are complicit when we fail to act, to demand that the state must do everything in its power to stop the fuel to the military-industrial complex that has brought war, death, misery to people of Gaza, to people of Palestine, to people of West Asia, and to the rest of us in the world. I think, unfortunately, let me leave it here today. It has been a pleasure, and I think we hope to have more of this conversation in future. But more than that, we hope to see all of you on the streets until genocide has ended, until the people of Palestine have returned to their land, until Palestine is free. And for me, that means a free, independent, and a socialist Palestine and federation of the whole of Middle East and in this socialist world. Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure being here.